Now, it's a really tough one because we're getting to the end of the season, and I'm going to talk about the best time to scout for whitetails. And this always bothered me. It was kind of like when I'd finished 3D season, shooting bows. I shot around the country, shot for Matthews Archery and the pro staff. And when it came down to the end of the season, people would talk about when should you start practicing, and the best time to practice is now for next season. No time off, nothing. And a little bit different with deer hunting. And I think sometimes we don't think about scouting at the best time of the year because we just got done hunting and we worked off all our favors with friends and family and career. It's almost like, yeah, we need to get back to doing normal life than hunting, and we need to come up for air. And I think our loved ones, family, friends are waiting for that at times, but that's also the best time to scout. So when it comes to scouting, and as it relates to the season, the best time to scout is ASAP, as soon as possible. That could be right now, meaning it's so important once you're done hunting to get in and scout. Get into areas that you haven't been into all season long. Look at that sign, look at those rubs, look at those scrapes, because that sign is the closest to when you actually need to be hunting. There's a lot of times people get into the woods in March and February and they find deer yards. They find areas where deer moved into for various forms of cover or food. They've come from a mile or two away or more. It can be very deceiving. It can give you the impression that a lot of deer are going to be there in October, November, and they're not. Right now it's nice because you look at bark and shavings under rubs on top of the leaves. That's indicative of more November, early December, maybe that second rut in early December, end of October. And then those shavings under the leaves, that's more September, early September. You look at two flurries of rubbing activity around the time when they're shedding their velvet, and those are on smaller rubs a lot of times, or smaller trees. And then mature bucks will start hitting those big rubs even in the middle of September, but then they don't really do much. It can give you the appearance that not much is there happening. And then all of a sudden you get into the end of October, November, and they start rubbing again. And it doesn't necessarily tell you that, boy, a buck's going to be here with that rub, because a lot of times with rubs, bucks are only hitting them a handful of times. We just did an observation of scraping activity where you have a mock scrape with a mock rub combo. And over a 2-month period, we actually had 22 unique buck hits on that in 2 months, and we had 210 scrape hits. Think about the scrapes. About 1/3 were bucks, 1/3 were fawns, and 1/3 were does. All were bucks, of course, with the rubbing. But bottom line is that whether it's natural or you're just setting up for an experiment, bucks don't revisit rubs all the time. They don't travel in that. It just shows you a buck was there at one time. Sometimes they're right before a field, a staging area or something like that. But even again, they might only come in there that one time in that location where all those rubs are. But it tells you when they're there. There's around that time. It tells you there were bucks there, and the frequency of rubs and number of rubs tells you that the overall number of bucks in the area. So if you go into an area on public land and there's a lot of different rubs, it's not near a bait pile. That's what I would experience in Michigan. You'd find a bunch of rubs, you find a bait pile 50 yards away. But it's just natural, it's out in the woods. You find a lot of rubs, it tells you the number of bucks in an area. There's some good equations for that the number of rubs and size of rubs indicates not only the number of bucks, but the size and age distribution of those bucks as it relates to small, big rubs over a period of time. But you can figure out the timing for those rubs in that sign, and you figure those scrapes are not covered up. Those branches are easy to see. The trails from fall are easy to see, cut into the leaves. The leaves haven't blown around and covered up trails. It's a great time to scout. And that's why, a lot of people don't get into the woods when they should. So getting into the woods at the best time for scouting will pay huge dividends for the fall, because you're actually looking at fall sign. That's number 2. So critical to understand what's fall sign, what's winter sign, what's spring sign. You can find bedding areas in the spring and summer. It means nothing for where they're at during the fall. It doesn't. It could be relating to leaf cover areas that would never hold deer during the fall, but they're there during the summer because they want shade. They want airflow. They're relating to a summer food source that's not there in the fall. Completely gone. So you want to actually scout as close to the end of season as possible. So look at it as hiking. You're putting your bow away, you're putting your gun away, just getting out and enjoying the woods, walking around. You don't care if you spook deer. Because if you spook deer right now, it really has no bearing on your hunting season for the following year. A lot of people have sanctuary area they've never been in for a year or two on private land. It's ridiculous. Go out there and enjoy it for 6-7 months out of the year. Know that that's not going to affect your hunting season, and you'll learn a lot more about whitetails in general but especially where they're leaving their sign, where they're moving from food source to bedding area, and where you should hang a stand this fall. Where should you scout? I love this time of year. Obviously the field edges are very easy. Most of the time where field edges are, where there's open edges, where there's access points, people see that sign. But I'm looking for interior areas. I can't wait till our last day to hunt is Sunday, and then we have next weekend I'll be able to hunt on Sunday. But pretty soon, by the end of the month in Minnesota here, I'll be able to start cutting bedding areas. I can't wait to get into some of these interior areas and see what the trails and sign look like from December. I'll be able to look at, this is the rubs. I mean, you might even find rubs with fresh shavings and bark on top of the snow. So then you know it was very recent. But I can't wait, because then that starts to give you, especially with snow on the ground in a lot of these northern places in the end of December and January, they really help you see close to the season where there's no deer. And finding where there's no deer helps you just as much as finding where there's deer. Because a lot of times when we find those deer, we get so focused on where those deer are at that we lose sight and vision of why they're there in the first place. And so when you find deer, that's one thing, but when you find large areas where there's no deer, start asking yourself why. And that's how you learn in any situation. Ask yourself why. A lot of times we just see deer, we get excited, we don't ask ourselves, why are they there right now? We just take it for granted they're always going to be there when they're not. But when they're not there, it helps so much to ask why. That's when you learn. That's when you learn about habitat, deer movements, hunting pressure that's pushed deer out of a certain area. Even on your own land, you can be really critical of yourself. You can say, yeah, I seem like we were pressuring this area a little bit, and I'm not finding any tracks in the snow. I'm not finding a lot of sign as it relates to that immediate time frame where February they might be congregated in there because it's close to food. There's decent habitat there, but it'd be very deceiving at that time of year versus actually scouting earlier. So whitetail scouting, certainly any time. You know, when I'm looking at summer scouting, I'm looking for historical rub patterns and historical sign patterns, meaning you can look at an area and you can look at rubs and say, wow, they've been rubbing here for 10 years. There's rubs from last year, there's rubs that are scarred over and growing over from 8-10 years ago. And so you're looking for that historical rub sign to validate that deer move through this area. So that's not a bad thing. But there's leaves on the tree, maybe you're getting to know the lay of the land, maybe you're getting to know access routes in and out through and in and around thick cover. So there's certainly reason to keep scouting, but actually validating where deer are at during the fall. The closer to hunting season that you can actually scout, the better, for several reasons. Get into those interior areas that you think deer are at, make sure they are right after the season ends. And boy, it's a great time to scout, great time to get out. And hey, at least you can tell people, your loved ones, that you're getting out and just going for a hike. They probably might want to come along too and get the whole family involved. I used to talk about the kids. We were on public land up in the UP in Michigan. We wouldn't find a lot of signs. So hey, it was first candy bar to the kid that was 4 or 5 years old that finds a rub. That was a little game we played. It was important not for only finding the rub, but to get kids involved in hunting and get them excited about it. So it's a great time to take the family out, friends, look for sign, look for rubs. Of course, it's fun to look for sheds in February, March too, and go for hikes. But really, again, I would go right after the season ends because that's when it really relates to the sign and to the deer and to the movements that you want to find and hunt during the deer season. I urge everyone out there to really check out my web classes. They've been wildly successful. We have one that details how you should design your land, another one that details how you should plant and maintain and manage your food plot program. How can you make those decisions that fit your land specifically and not someone else's? Unfortunately, there's so much information in the hunting industry that says you should do this, but it doesn't apply to you. These web classes directly apply to you. And then we have our third web class that came out last year, our rut web class, navigating the entire rut. And then we have our fourth one coming out, which is hunting hills and thermals. I urge you to check those out, try the web classes, and they're all about teaching, helping you understand how you can navigate, not only managing your property, food plots, and the rut, but also hunting strategically, hills, thermals, and wherever you pursue whitetails for your dream and your passion.